Welcome back to the IPA's Better Read Than Dead book series. Today we are discussing the iconic and classic novel Heart of Darkness, touching on a number of themes, including, of course, the theme of colonialism, something you might hear about on certain public broadcasters and from certain members of the Australian Senate. But we're going to do it right with a reference to one of the truly, truly great books of Western civilization. And joining me today is the much requested fan favourite of Better Read Than Dead, Chetna Mahadik. Chetna, welcome back. Everybody loved our chat on Pride and Prejudice last time, so you've been dobbed in to come and discuss another classic book. How are you going?
I'm going well, and I really enjoyed the discussion on Pride and Prejudice. So it's a pleasure to discuss another classic.
Well, the Pride and Prejudice, I remember, was one that you really loved and you just jumped at the opportunity to talk about. This is one that I read about 5 years ago when I actually went to Africa in slightly more glamorous circumstances than poor old Marlow. But something I read about 5 years ago, you read a bit more recently, but really something I enjoyed largely for, I suppose, the writing style and the storytelling and the shades of Louis Ferdinand Céline you saw in there. But most people know Heart of Darkness for its literary significance in terms of its themes, in terms of its topical nature at the time. So the obvious question, let's get it out of the way. What does the book say about the C word, colonialism?
Heart of Darkness is one of the most celebrated books in English literature. And I don't think it holds itself back in criticizing the impact of colonization or colonialism, whatever's the term that we want to use, on the African continent and on the African people. I mean, it talks about what ivory trade did to the African people. It talks about
the indentured servitude of the time, or outright slavery.
Outright slavery of the people, but also just the cruel treatment of these people. But I think what's also interesting is that the book explores what this is doing to the colonizer, to the soul of the colonizer, how it's corrupting it, this kind of intense power that they have, you know, and particularly, like, you know, when it discusses Kurtz, that's what it's looking at. Kurtz, who's like, you know, the villain, the super villain, the monster,
the monster
of the book. That is what it's saying, that this man goes there, and once he's confronted with his own immense power over these people, he just completely submits to the evil side of his nature,
and he descends into a kind of greed and avarice that becomes outright madness in the end as well. It's delusional, literally.
But it is torturing his own soul. I mean, he is a tortured person, and that also comes out in the book. So all that hasn't done him all that much of good. And I think that's one of the reasons why this book is still read, like generations later. It's still being read by people, not just in the West, but around the world. And but particularly in the West, because I think that they're still trying to reckon. It's quite an honest attempt at trying to reckon with their own history and their own past of what colonization also did to them, or it could have possibly done to them.
Well, that's right. I mean, do you think that it was, though, the corruption of the soul, or do you think that the soul was corrupt to begin with? I mean, there is a sense that there was a noble... and historically there was a noble aim to... I mean, that was in the Victorian era, this idea that the mission of the British Empire was to bring civilization and order and progress to the savages, as they would have termed them back then. But I think what Conrad was sort of getting at was that it was a misguided sort of idea to begin with. Or do you not see that cultural relativism in there?
I think he does refer to it, but I think what he is really exploring is when these young men find themselves in an environment which is completely alien. And, you know, suddenly all the trappings of civilization around them are just gone. There is no community, there's no society, there is no real sense of administration around them. You know, they're just free to act as they are in a lot of ways. Suddenly, the only thing that stands between them and the baser side of their nature, you know, that's there in all of us, is really their own moral compass. And too many of them succumb. So actually and he does refer to it in the book, you know, that so much of what we do and why we conduct ourselves in honest ways is because of the trapping of civilization around us. that everything around us, our society, our community, which is holding us up to certain standards, is what is also making us act in certain ways. And when you take that away completely, what will happen? And I think that is the warning it's trying to give to people, because he's absolutely critical of colonization, but this is what he's really doing. That's why he takes you on this journey into Congo, into the heart of the jungle, and he's exploring what is going on with the psyche of all these men.
And that's, I guess, the interesting juxtaposition. Again, this idea that the colonial project was about bringing civilization. It actually, from its subjects or from the agents of it, extracted civilization. It actually it savagized, I suppose, the people who embarked on it. But for all that, it's not a cultural relativist novel, I don't think.
No.
It does not have this idea that the pre-existing societies were perfect and they were brought, the colonialism of the Europeans brought suffering and injustice, but Marlow as a narrator is pretty critical and dismissive of, and dehumanises the native population as well. When he,
yes, he does. He does do that. But on the other hand, you have to place yourself in his position, in the position of people who were coming from a very different environment. And suddenly they literally are back at the dawn of human civilization. And it's easy for us to read this book today or judge, but and think that somehow we will do better if we were confronted with such a situation. But would we?
No. Well, that's the arrogance of tearing down statues and so on. So, and this historical nihilism we're seeing from the fact that Abraham Lincoln has been cancelled. There is this very unfair judging of historical figures who are all flawed and complex people. They're all humans. A lot of them did some bad things, but there's this loss of complexity there, this idea that we know better than every generation that came before us, and judging them by that exact same standard. Yeah, no, that's really true. And I think in doing that, we are also dehumanizing our own ancestors. When I say our own ancestor, I mean that generally. Because somehow we think that we're taking away their human flaws. And in doing that, we're also dehumanizing them. Correct. So I think that, when I read the book, and, it's interesting because like my father, he's of Indian background. He's Indian, but he worked in Africa for 5 years as a doctor. And I was born there. Hence, and that's one of the reasons why I really enjoyed the book. So you were a product of colonialism then? Well, he went there as a young enough man, and he was also sort of looking for his fortune in some way and looking for adventure. He found it very hard. Coming from India, he still found Africa very hard because it was just so unfamiliar. And India may be poor, but it's still a very old civilization. It has a philosophy, religion, it has administrative structures. But when he was there in the bush, he's a doctor, so he had to do a lot of malaria prevention. When he was going and visiting deep in the bush, all these tribes, he really had to, it did confront him, and he had to ask a lot of questions of himself as well. But that's an interesting, I guess, contrast, because people would look at Africa and look at India and say, and particularly self-proclaimed progressives and people on the left, they would say, well, both places were disrupted and suffered greatly because of colonialism. Now, that is true to a certain degree, but the interesting question is, what did the colonisers leave behind? You said India has administrative structures and government and civilization. That at least is partly derived from British influence. The national language is still English. No, the national language, well, technically it's Hindi. Technically it's Hindi, right. Technically it's Hindi, but yes, English is widely spoken. And, one of the reasons why India is, an emerging power, and English has played a very important role in that. The fact that a lot of Indians can communicate quite well in English. I think that has definitely played a role. But
But I think it's unfair to compare colonization in India to colonization in Africa. They were very different experiences.
Really?
So yes, very, very different. And
why is that?
Because India, when the British first arrived and they arrived as traders, India was already, it had been a civilization for 4,000 years before that. So, we could trace back our history, meaning, and it had its own architecture. It already had its own administrative systems in India because we had the Mughal Empire. And the empire was actually quite well run at the time that the English traders actually not just the European traders first arrived. And it is only after the invasion from the Persia that the Mughal Empire really just sort of fell apart. Disintegrated, and suddenly it was just like a free-for-all. And then it was essentially who was the strongest and who's just going to grab most power. And the British were just good at it, I guess.
Well, they were good at it, and this is and we'll get back to the book in a second, but this is the great complexity that arises when you look at Africa. And again, there is the temptation to say the issues with Africa in terms of poverty and lower living standards and economic development and so on are hangovers from colonialism. I guess to play the devil's advocate, you can see that insofar as the difference between how different countries in Africa have performed economically and in terms of governance and so on since. The plight of Kenyans is not as bad as, say, the plight of people in the Central African Republic or Chad. A lot of it hinges upon, I would say, which colonial power got there first. The British were not perfect. They did not get everything right, far from it. But the British, I find from looking at the history, at least attempted to improve upon at least they built institutions, courts, parliamentary democracy, railways. The French, by contrast, sort of kicked the door down, grabbed whatever they could and scuttled off again almost universally.
Well, yeah, that is that's an important distinction also because we're talking about Congo.
Yes.
And it is actually Belgium.
Which is the worst of them all.
And it actually, I think it's historically accepted now that what Belgium did in Congo was by far the worst.
Correct. Because it was basically the personal fiefdom of King Leopold, who was a complete and utter lunatic.
Exactly. And that is referred to in the book.
Yeah.
So, that's also a distinction we are not quite making, that colonialism generally had its ills, but how different countries colonized also had a huge impact on the experiences of the people who are being colonized.
Yeah. So in this book, we have, I think, the worst example. And again, to go back to your first point, it shows man's worst impulses, their worst base desires unleashed in the absence of, as you said, the trappings of civilization, open and self-acknowledged greed, the dehumanization of the local population, the subjugation, the cruelty. Even Marlow, who was reacting against the evils of colonialism. There was the scene in the book where the African helmsman of the boat died, and he referred to him as an instrument, not a human being, as a tool. There was, what do we make of Marlow as the narrator? Is he a monster too? Did he lose his humanity?
I wouldn't say so. And I think one particular bit really struck me when I was reading in this case, when, he's first, he reaches the spot where Kurtz is living, and he's talking to this fervent follower, this fan of Kurtz, Harlequin, who, as he's referred to. And while he's talking to him, he sees these tribal leaders who are going to go and pay homage to Kurtz. And I think that they're on their knees he's just not able to see it. He literally turns himself away and he says, I don't want to see this. He just could not cope with the subjugation of the people. So definitely I think that I do think that he was very aware of what this is doing. He was quite sympathetic to what he saw of the African people, that it talks about the dead bodies he saw sprawled around, and he's definitely very confronted by it. And I don't think, even how it ends, when he's back in Europe, he's still processing it.
Yeah.
And he's still not sure what he has undergone. So I think he is his mental state, as it's discussed, is just a person who is just struggling to cope with everything he's experiencing.
Yeah.
And within that, there might be moments when he looks at this, his African, the boatman and have that sort of a thought. But there are many other occasions when, he's having a very, very human thought towards the people he's seeing and the situations.
He is, but not as equals though in the pure sense. And again, there's a humanistic element and to this book, but again, not a culturally relativist one. I mean, this book would be cancelled. In fact, I'm pretty sure it has been cancelled in a lot of places because of the narrator Marlow's reference to people as primitive or savages or even prehistoric.
Yeah.
I mean, how does that wash? That I suppose it's this.
I just want to know, who is this perfect hero?
Yeah.
I mean, who is this perfect character who has no flaws?
Yeah, well, it would make a boring book, I suppose. Again, people are flawed, people are complex.
People are flawed, people are complex, and if we want to actually explore, a real human being, then we'll just have to come up. Then we can't wash away, his flaws.
Speaking of evil, and speaking of the human nature. What do we make of Kurtz? You say he's a monster. I'm not so sure it's as cut and dry as that. But what makes Kurtz the monster from your observation of the book?
You know what? The thing that really struck me when I was reading the book was that everything that is monstrous about Kurtz is implied.
Yeah.
They never actually show him do anything particularly evil.
No.
But it's implied in, the hushed tone of people, the way they talk about him and all the unfinished sentences. There's a lot of secrecy around him.
It's almost unspeakable.
Yes, it's almost unspeakable, but also in the fear that people have of criticizing him, and what happens to people who criticize him, because the only real, scene of horror is that he looks up and he sees three men's head on stakes, on spikes, and they are the rebels.
Yeah.
That just shows what happens if you criticize
But
Kurtz.
it's implied.
Again, because you don't see it happen.
No.
So I think that is what it's really, for me, that was really interesting, because I was just like, well, we don't really know who's a monster, who's not.
But that's what I took out of it, though, to a certain extent, because Kurtz was mad and had a cult and made himself the king and supreme. But then again, so did almost every other European character in the novel. So did the staff of various outposts and so on, the way they subjugated the local population. So the question is, who's more of a villain? The Europeans who arrived and were ostensibly still sane, who were trying to bring their own noble idea of civilizing influence, or Kurtz, who's at least open about the fact that he's a bad guy and...
What's interesting about Kurtz is that Kurtz doesn't start off like that.
No.
He actually is this, yes, he's an ivory trader, but there are references to actually how articulate he was. He had these great ideas, about justice, about love, and it is referred through in the novel. A lot of people think like he's a man of great ideas. In fact, I think it is his own sense of his own greatness which leads him to the place where he is.
Yeah.
And that is why he wants to not just dominate people's actions. What he's trying to do is he's dominating their thinking.
And their souls.
Yeah. And that is what's so frightening about him.
Geez, there are a lot of Kurtzes now that you mention it in today. But this is the thing. There are so many people. I mean, hell, Adolf Hitler was filled with his own sense of greatness.
Yeah, but...
I think there is this idea, and it comes through in the novel, this idea that our vision of a perfect society, our vision of improving a society and a place and a people and a collective good, it has bad results. You can't come up with a sense of nobility and high purpose and coerce people into your vision of a perfect world.
I think that definitely when you might have ideas about the world, but if you think that you can, your idea should prevail over every other, and you're ready to do whatever it takes to have your idea prevail.
Yeah.
And I think that is when it leads to the sort of results we're talking about. But I think I do want to go back to this thing that we don't really, like people like you and I, we can't always tell who is leading us down this, evil paths. If you really, because they are charismatic people, often.
Yeah.
But I think it is really, if you observe how people respond to them, that you can, at least it can give you warning signals. Like, I was thinking about Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah.
And, if you look at Harvey Weinstein, a lot of the way people are responding to Kurtz, those are the sort of things, the hushed tones, the mythology, the fevered following, or what happens to people who who criticize him.
Correct.
How they just disappear, or they don't find jobs anymore. Everybody, so all that were already signs that there's something wrong with this man. And he has untrammeled power. So I think that when we are looking at even political leaders, that is what we should be observing.
And the way in which I guess the madness of the mob, the madness of, again, because the book paints, and I think the book's strength is that it talks it manages to highlight the absurdity. It really, again, the juxtaposition of the civilizing influence versus the barbarity, the wretchedness, the horror. So let's go into the meta significance of the book now, and that is that for all of its foibles, the fact that it might not meet the current baseline of the anti-colonial simplistic white man bad view of today, for all that, it was an achievement for Western literature in the sense that Europe was not the only civilization that had colonialism, slavery, subjugation, but it was the only civilization, or the civilization with the strongest record of reflecting on it and producing artistic works that force us to confront it.
That's actually when I started thinking about colonization, the thing that I found myself asking is that why did Conrad write it? Like, why did the publisher publish it? And having published this book, why is it that people read it? Why is it that generations of Europeans have read the book, they have revered it, they've debated it, why isn't it like Gulag? Why didn't it just get banned? Like Gulag Archipelago, which just got banned in Russia. But this book was never banned.
And why were there no literary reflections on Chinese expansionism in the Ming Dynasty, for example?
Where's the Arab heart of darkness?
Where's the Mongol heart of darkness?
If you want to talk about slaves, the slave trade of Arabs was nearly as bad.
So why do you think? Why not? Why hasn't that? Why has it been Western civilization that has, I suppose, applied its moral compass to itself, that's had this inward-looking reflection on?
I think it all starts with free speech.
Right.
Once you have free speech and everybody is, because it's not as if it is not possible that people, say in China, or have not reflected over how terrible some of the aspects of, say, the Cultural Revolution would have been. But are they allowed to share those thoughts? Are they allowed to honestly write about it? Are they, who will publish it? Will the government, or will their intellectual class openly celebrate it? Are they free to openly celebrate it? So I think the fact that free speech somehow, not somehow, but like free speech is such an important part of the Western cultures, definitely would have played a role in why this book is still around and why this book was written in the first place.
But it's not just a matter of autocratic states and places with bad records on civil and political rights suppressing Tiananmen Square and things like that. I mean, the Japanese, for example, will have, and I'm generalising a lot here, but there is a lot less, schools there don't teach extensively about the occupation of Manchuria, of Korea and so on. The knowledge of Japanese historical mistakes, just as an example, I'm not picking on the Japanese, but it's And it's not a censorship thing. It's a cultural thing. It's this, you don't want to bring shame upon your people and your country.
I would separate what is taught in schools from the general cultural environment. Because I do think that when we are teaching young children, we definitely want them to have a sense of pride in their culture, because their minds are still being formed. And whichever culture you're coming from, you have to learn to first respect it before you can criticize it. But then there's the cultural sphere. Cultural sphere is where novels are written, plays are performed, and that is the space in which we are far more open to really go into, all aspects, good and bad, of your actions in the past.
And again, free speech enables that in a critical way.
Yes, free
It all comes
speech
back to
enables.
free speech.
Yes, yes. And I feel like that is why the cancel culture that we are experiencing at the moment,
existential.
particularly in the cultural sphere, is really damaging.
Yeah. And again, the great irony is that I'm sure there are a lot of people who would talk about how problematic Heart of Darkness is because of the way, again, using phrases
what they don't realize is that, today's Heart of Darkness is probably in the making, but if they continue with their cancel culture, it won't get published.
Yeah, but that's the saddest thing, because, again, people would have a go at the fact that Marlow talks about savages, about prehistoric people and so on. I mean, you miss the nuance.
Yeah.
And you miss really the fun, and this is a product of 100 odd years ago as well, this book.
And that is how a European person at that time would have thought.
Yeah.
You either want to know or you want to keep yourself hidden from it.
Yeah. But I think there is something unique, something special about Western civilization that has permitted that. And it's not just the absence of censorship and the free speech ethic, but though those things helped, but it is the uniquely, and maybe Christianity lent itself to or triggered a lot of these advancements. But I always say, especially around the debate about the Ramsey Centre and Western civilization is a good thing or a bad thing, I say, look, Western civilization did not invent slavery. Slavery preceded the rise of Western civilization. Western civilization abolished slavery. Western civilization gave us the abolitionists who were Christian missionaries, people like Robert Livingston and so on. That is what Heart of Darkness is to me. It is this inward reflection, this again, the birth of humanism, what led to the idea that all men are created equal, as the American Declaration of Independence so immortally says.
Every people, if we just wanted to talk about generally, not Western every set of people around the world, if you go back into their history, you're going to find very, very damaging things that have been done to them and that they have done. But I think what a book like this does is that it gives us a platform to discuss it. We are not meant to say that, because this happened, hence everything today is terrible.
Yeah.
We're supposed to put it in that historical perspective and learn from it. And what we learn from Heart of Darkness is, again, this really important thing that, that it is your moral compass that actually protects you against your own baser side.
Yeah.
Everybody has a base side to their nature. And, and it really becomes important when you find yourself in a space where, suddenly all the rules have fallen apart.
Yeah.
And that can happen in case of war. That can even happen on Twitter when a mobbing takes place.
Yeah.
Why do you assume that you will be the victim? Maybe you're the mobber.
Yeah. And more to the point, because of anonymity, because of the distance.
Exactly, because of the anonymity. Exactly. Or it could even be in a private sphere. It could be happening in a house where one person has too much power over the other.
Yeah. Or, the most fractious event that happened recently, which is the Corona era, 2 years of lockdowns of a
there are
very
no
unusual
rules.
situation.
Suddenly there are no rules.
Well, there are a lot of rules.
Yeah, there are a lot of rules,
but there were
not
very few
what
norms.
Yeah, food. Yeah.
There was, and this is the thing. The savagery of people came out. It wasn't just Dan Andrews who was the villain during Corona. It was people who
dobbed on their neighbours
and supported it too. People who looked at, for example, the instance of a woman who could not get across the border for urgent medical care, and as a result, one of her twin babies died in utero.
Yeah.
There's something savage about a society like that.
Yeah.
Where we turn our back on...
Because suddenly we were confronted by
moral
something
compass is lost.
so... Yes, exactly. It was so unfamiliar, and suddenly it was only a moral compass.
Yeah.
And how many people... That's a question each person has to ask himself.
Yeah.
But I think what we learn is that even when things are fine, what you have to do is you've got to nourish your moral compass, you know, your morality, how you think of, don't give in to, like, you know, easy lies, and don't give in to weakness. Keep it nourished. Because why is it that Marlow did not succumb to his evil side of nature and Kurtz did?
Yeah.
You know, there is something there.
Why do you think?
Well, I just think that
he wasn't there long enough, maybe.
No, there are two things. Marlow was humble.
Yeah.
He did not have a sense of grandeur.
And of this smug superiority, this idea of a better society.
Yeah, he was there for, you know, his own individual gain.
Yeah.
He did not think that he was there to, like you said, improve society or improve a set of people. So he had a sense of humbleness about him, whereas Kurtz had a sense of grandeur about him.
Going back to the original point you made, which is that it shows not only the effect on the colonised, but on the coloniser of the people who are being corrupted. Kurtz doesn't meet a very good end, does he?
No.
No.
No, and that's where the lesson lies. Not just in his physical death, but in the torturous, like the torture of his soul.
What do you think he meant when he said the horror of the horror? Was he talking about the horrors he inflicted, the horror of his immediate surroundings, of the way he was living, or was it something internal?
I think it was something internal. I think that when you have done the sort of things that Kurtz had done, I think it kills something good inside you.
Yeah.
And then the only thing that is left is your evil side.
Is horror.
And the horror.
Is horror. Well, that is a perfectly optimistic and happy place to leave it for this discussion. But hope you've enjoyed this discussion with the wonderful Chetna Mahadik about The Heart of Darkness, part of the IPA's Better Read Than Dead book club series. Now, if you're interested in getting more involved with the IPA or want to indeed join the next wave of books that we review for this book club, head on over to ipa.org.au/join and make sure you check out the IPA's Generation Liberty program. Now, this is a program aimed at Australia's young people, aiming to give them the ideas about Western civilization, about freedom, about free market economics, about free speech, about an honest debate on climate change that they are certainly not getting from the school system. So if you are between the ages of 18 and 25, please go and check out Generation Liberty. Join and get a real education from your friendly team right here at the Institute of Public Affairs, because the only way we will progress and we will nourish our moral compasses, I think, is by acquainting ourselves with the timeless ideals of Western civilization, of freedom, and of educating ourselves in some crazy times. But Chetna, thank you so much. Head on over to ipa.org.au to find out more, and we will see you again right here on Better Read Than Dead.